Hello, my name is Bob Doyle. I'm the training chief for the Glendale Fire Department. What I'm going to share with you is an abridged version of some training that we have given all our city employees and our entire fire department to better prepare you and help you understand the potential of a mud and debris flow that does exist in the La Crescenta Montrose area. So with that, if you look at the slide here, you'll notice that if you can see in the fine print, it says looking north on Ocean View Boulevard. This particular picture was taken New Year's Day 1934 following a significant rain that caused this mud and debris flow. This is a picture up on Foothill Boulevard. If you look, you can if you're familiar with the ridge lines of the Verdugos and the San Gabriels, you'll notice that that same profile still exists. This happens to be folks trying to look for loved ones. Approximately 100 people were killed as a result of this mud and debris flow in 1934. As we investigated what could occur and the potential that does exist, some interesting facts came to light for me, and that is to learn that the San Gabriel Mountains are the fastest growing mountains in North America. And really essentially what that means, as I understand it, these mountains, as they rise, they shed, and that is a natural process, and it loosens the soil, and when we have significant rain, we end up getting a mud and debris flow. Another interesting fact that I learned about the San Gabriels was some of the most concentrated rain flows have occurred in the San Gabriel Mountains. That phenomenon is known as orographic lifting. When those weather patterns come in, they hit the San Gabriels, that intense rain hammers down on those mountain ridge tops, and then that system falls apart as it rolls into and over Wrightwood and into the Antelope Valley. There's another interesting phenomenon or process called hydrophobic soil, and this process is anytime these mountainous areas burn, it creates this chemical reaction that creates a kind of a visqueen or a protector barrier over that soil, so that when it does rain, that water sleets off and runs off. But at a point of saturation, that natural process doesn't work, and then we end up getting a mud and debris flow or big chunks of the soil sloughing off and going downstream. And we'll have some more pictures of what that looks like for you here in just a bit. So what is a mud and debris flow? Well, it's earth, it's rocks, it's trees, and it's houses, it's cars, it's anything else that is downstream and in the way. And just want to give you a little perspective here, and we have a video piece that will help punctuate what that is. You notice that bigger boulder, that's not a football size, that's a small car size boulder being pushed down. There's nothing you can do to stop this. There's nothing you can do to turn it off when the earth decides to move, and whether it's quake driven or whether it's rain driven, it's going to move, and it's going to move quick. Okay, this slide here I thought was important for all of us to understand, because what it tells us is that when we have percentage of slope that's greater than 100%, which is 45 degrees, we have a very likely possibility of having a slope slippage or a mud and debris flow when we have a significant rain. And then it also shows, as you can see, that the effects or the speeds is a significant issue, and it will accelerate if we are talking about a slope greater than 45 degrees or 100%, which most of our slopes are in the San Gabriels in the La Crescenta area. This is a picture of Wrightwood. In the early 40s, they had what's known as a scarp, and that's not a typo. That is we have a piece of the mountain slough off in one big chunk, and that picture there where the ski slopes are is a result of that scarp falling off the mountain, and it had moved actually 15 miles into the desert, and in some places the bottom parts of Wrightwood were covered in debris 148 feet deep, and that was actually not too long ago. Okay, here's a picture of La Crescenta. This rock was found up on Foothill following the 1934 disaster. Again, nearly 100 people were killed, many missing and never found again. It was pushing rocks like this down the mountain and into the communities that in those days they really just didn't have the means or the technology to deal with. So what they ended up doing is digging holes and pushing these rocks into those holes and burying them and just building on top of them. This particular slide, if you look at the ridge line in the back, that's that building that's in the background of the vehicle is probably in the neighborhood of Ocean View and Verdugo, where Shriners is right now today. And that's you can see the debris and the mud that has made it down that far out of the San Gabriels and even further down into Main Street, Glendale. What I'd like you to do with this slide here, if you notice the parallel between the 1934 disaster in La Crescenta, and it was actually following a significant fire, the Pickens fire. The Pickens fire occurred up in that area of Montrose, La Crescenta, and it was 7,200 acres. And then it was followed by a significant wet weather season, and then we had fatalities because of mud and debris flow following that. And then you can go all the way down the list. So the empirical information, the data says that if you have a big fire season and you have a wet season right behind it, history has proven that there's fatalities from mud and debris flow. And that really is what we want to try and get across here and punctuate to our citizens, that we can't predict. We can't make a perfect prediction on what's going to occur and when the rains are going to come and how the erosion and the soil is going to respond. But what we can tell you is that anytime we've had a big fire season and a wet season that followed, unfortunately, people died. So we want our folks to be educated. We want them to be ready to evacuate. We want you to move out, and we want you to take this serious. Your city staff is taking it serious, and we want to partner with you to make sure we can be as safe as possible. Again, we talked about what happened in 1933, New Year's Eve. There was a big party here at the American Legion, which was at the time up in the neighborhood of Rosemont and Montrose Avenue. Survivors stated that they heard the heavy rain pounding on the roof, and then it sounded like a roar of a train, and 12 people were sucked out of the American Legion just after midnight and never found again. This is a picture of a little different perspective. It's a little bit further up, showing the Pickens fire footprint, yet that fire was 7,000 acres, and then with the wet weather behind it, we've had this major destruction here. This picture is from a fixed-wing aircraft that's kind of flying over the Glendale proper area, and if you look at the ridgeline, you might be able to pick out some obvious features that they don't change that quick. And that big river that I would suspect that's probably in the neighborhood of where the LA River is today. And then on the right you can see our town, the city of Glendale. So again, this slide is just showing you some of the poor folks that were trying to look for loved ones, dig people out following that disaster in 34. And that they say a 20-foot wall of mud and debris came roaring out of that canyon and slammed into all of those homes. What I would remind you with this particular slide is just to understand, back then our census tell us the population was probably in a neighborhood of 61, 62,000. We're north of 200,000 today. And that La Crescenta Montrose area obviously was considered a remote living. It wasn't nearly as populated in terms of percentage or ratio as compared to the whole population of the city of Glendale. So our population in those areas are significantly more today, obviously. And if something like this were to have happened today, our numbers could be astronomical. So that's an important point to keep in mind. And this is a picture of Foothill Boulevard, where you can see all of these big boulders that have made it all the way down to as far as the Glendale College area. This is a picture, I believe, of Pennsylvania Avenue. And what we tried to use this picture for our folks, particularly the firefighters, is to let them know that, if this thing's coming down, you're not going to be able to drive your fire engine up into these areas where they got soccer and basketball-sized boulders coming down at you. And we are looking at unconventional means of getting into the slopes or the spur ridges on the east and west sides and hiking in to do our reconnaissance and our triage if that's so required. This is a hand drawing following the slide, showing where it hit, and it shows Foothill Boulevard, and kind of where it flares out at the bottom is the toe of the slope of Whiting Woods. Here's another aerial shot of footprint of the mud and debris flow. When these things occur, they aren't going to Tujunga and they aren't going to Pasadena. Gravity's going to take it down through that choke point, which is in the neighborhood of Verdugo and Cañada by Glendale College. That's where it'll all funnel to as it's making its way to the ocean. Okay, this slide just shows a house that ended up in a location that it didn't originate. It was taken off of its foundation, and the power of the mud and the debris flow had moved it from its original spot. This particular view here, if you look at the ridge line in the back, you might recognize the Whiting Woods, Hossetter, Verdugo mountain range, and then the San Gabriels would be to the right. So we're in a neighborhood of Montrose, Rosemont area, looking west towards the Pennsylvania, La Crescenta area. And you can see the devastation and the destruction, and everything was affected. There was no getting out of the way of this. Sadly, in Glendora, this whole mud and debris flow of taking lives isn't just back in the 30s and 40s where they're ill-prepared. That's not the case. In the 1969, as this slide shows, 73 people died. Again, this wet season where people were killed here followed a heavy fire season. There's another shot of some of the houses in the Glendora area. And this slide just goes to serve my point earlier that when we're dispatched to an address or a location, we may not be taking the conventional means to get there. We may have to park our fire engines way out, put whatever equipment we think is most appropriate into our backpacks, and hike it on foot. This slide just is another picture of the Glendora, and again, as the text says below, some people were pushed up against the ceiling of their bedrooms, and they stayed that way until firefighters cut holes in their roofs with axes and extricated them that way, and I'll call that a Katrina-style rescue, if you will, or extrication. Okay, Mill Creek fire. Again, we had fatalities following that, and that again is La Crescenta, Tujunga, that area. It involved us in the north portion of our city. Altadena, this was following the Kenaloa fire. There were fatalities the wet season that came in behind it. Likewise with Bailey Canyon in 1994. And this slide shows firefighters digging out and trying to protect property in the wet season that followed the old Topanga fire. And we had the Calabasas fire in '76. So everything here is predictable in terms of heavy fire season followed by heavy winter season. This is the minimum that we can expect. This is a sad event. This is Christmas morning in Devore, which is part of our mountainous range just down the freeway a bit, and it resulted in the fatalities of many, including children. And take a look at the size of the rocks and the boulders that are just with looks like simple ease making its way down the middle of that street through this community. You're not going to be driving a fire engine up there. You're not going to be driving a police car or your SUV. We're not going to be putting people into this. There's nothing we can do except bring more victims to the event if we tried to go into the mouth of something like this coming out. We have to come in from the sides to make access to the people that need us. Here's a result of the video footage I just showed you, and really what is a wet moving body of slurry and debris rapidly hardens and dries like concrete. Cable Canyon is in the same area. There was 2 fatalities there. This is all the Waterman Canyon area that you may recall in 2003, where many people lost their lives in that wet season. This poor gentleman is trapped. He lost his daughter. His daughter was found later. She actually perished as a result of this situation. but he's trapped. And what we are illustrating to our folks with this slide is that you're not going to have your fire engine with you with your high lift jacks. You're not going to have hoist helicopters available to you because the whole area is probably affected. And are the tools that we're going to have to hike in on our back. So this is kind of an unorthodox, unconventional approach to rescue that we're training our folks to be prepared for. So I suppose the point I'd like to make with that last slide, as sad as it is, and contrasting that or considering it when we look at this side, our city, it's happened here before. It's happened to our neighbors before. Could it happen here again? I think so. And I think we need to be prepared for this. We ask you to take this serious. We ask you to listen to our warnings. If we ask for an evacuation, get out. It is not worth gambling your life or your family's life. Get them out. And these things come up so quick, we may not even have the ability or have the knowledge to issue an evacuation. It's going to take folks that are living up in those areas to be self-starters. And if you think you should be leaving an area because the rain's that heavy, leave. Don't wait for just the evacuation because we may be late getting that information. What I'm trying to show here is what it looked like following that big event in 34. This is Foothill Boulevard, and here it is today. The infrastructure is much more. We do have one advantage today, and I'll back up to prior to 1933-34 and that disaster, Mr. Eaton, you may be familiar with that name because of Eaton's Canyon, was appealing to local leaders to build a drainage system that would help remove water and mud and the like. And of course, that didn't occur before the 33-34 event, but after that, we are now left with the most elaborate debris basin and waterway removal channel in the world, I'm told. This is kind of a schematic of the debris basin system that was put in place as a result of the 34 disaster. And what's interesting to note is that many of the waterways that you see on the east or the right side of your screen start in La Cañada or the county area, but they do go underground. They tie into the system that's in Glendale. So again, the only natural way out for gravity to take water is through that choke point that's at about Glendale College, Cañada, and Verdugo Road. These debris basins can fill up really quickly. They told me 15 minutes of decent rain will fill a debris basin. Again, a picture of 34 versus 2009. And as the slide illustrates here, the critical difference is we had 100 fatalities with a much less of a population as a result of a fire that was 7,000 acres in a wet weather season, in comparison today where we have a fire that was north of 100,000 acres and a wet weather season with a much denser population. So is there a chance that this could be coming our way? I think so. I'm not going to tell you that I have any kind of empirical information that tells me what's going to occur. Well, it's impossible to predict these things with accuracy. We do know, though, if it does rain, with the lack of watershed and chaparral on those hills, and the number of people living in those areas, we feel at risk, and we feel we need to bring this information to you so that you can prepare appropriately. And anytime we have significant rain, if I lived up there, I would be staying with a relative elsewhere. There's the footprint of the Pickens fire in comparison to the station fire. And as I stated earlier, La Cañada in November, we had, this is the result of a rain event that came up that was not predicted, that was not tracked. It popped up and it concentrated over a small area of La Cañada, and it damaged many, many homes. The 1st In Battalion Chief is a friend of mine. I talked to him about this specific event, and he tells me, Bob, when I got dispatched out of my station, which is at Crown and Foothill, heading over there, it was clear. blue skies, and sunny. And I get up there, we had intense rain that hammered this area, and this was the result. And he told me that 5 or 10 more minutes of this, and he thought that we would have wide-scale destruction. So it can happen, and it can happen without being predicted, is the takeaway, I suppose. Here's a kind of perspective on where it was. Gives you kind of a whole new appreciation on where your house may or may not be in terms of orientation to a canyon. Some more pictures of the folks working hard to remove the damage in the mud, but as you can see, it's too late here. And this is just another illustration of the fact that it was dry, blue skies when they got dispatched, and by the time they got up there, they had that small little isolated cell that caused all that damage. Here's a picture of the debris basin, and it's kind of hard to get perspective here, but those aren't little teeny twigs or kindling or anything like that. Some of those logs and those lumbers are 8, 10, 16-inch diameter trees, and those pylons, I'm told, are taller than I am at 6'3", so there's a lot, tons and tons and tons of debris that resulted from I'll call a rogue cell, an unpredicted, an untracked, a surprise weather cell that happened in 15 minutes. This house, although I do love the aluminum fire curtains over the windows, it looks like they served a dual purpose for mud and debris flow, and these folks were lucky. Again, much more of this type of exposure, and they would have had mud over through the windows. They obviously had water into the house and mud because it came in through the bottom seal, but it could have been a lot worse. Don't want to confuse a mud and debris flow with a landslide. Now, you may recall La Conchita. We lost 10 citizens in La Conchita. This is a picture of what happened. I actually had a friend of mine who was an incident commander on the freeway for another incident and observed this come down. While he was there dealing with a multi-vehicle car accident on the freeway, he heard a roar or noise, and he looked up, and this mountain gave way. And sadly, it's now a memorial for 10 folks that lost their lives that are buried underneath that mess. But the difference is that was a landslide and not a mud and debris flow. Here's another picture of a landslide, and just to give you a perspective how fast it can happen. Just keep in mind, you're going to see some trees coming down. They aren't those 10 and 15-foot pretty little white birch trees that we use for landscaping. These are mill timber, big Doug firs that are coming down. It reaches saturation, and when it lets go, it lets go. I would hate to be on that road when that came down. And that is the scarp that it left, similar to what happened in Wrightwood in 1941. So are we ready? That's a rhetorical question. However, I'd ask that you take it personally. If you live up in those areas, if you have any doubt at all that you have pre-planned a short, important document, escape package, if you will, so that if you don't like the sound or the volume of that rain, get out, take off, go to a relative's house, a friend's house. I know it's an inconvenience, but I'd rather be inconvenienced than the alternative. And the other thing too that I'll tell you, there are no experts. There is no models to go by when the mud and the debris is going to. We can't plan it. We can't say at Sunday night at 02 in the morning we're going to have a mud and debris flow event and we'd like you to be on your way out the door at 01. We don't know. We just don't know. So we may get it wrong when it comes to an evacuation. We may be on that evacuation button early only to really displace you and then let you come back to your home and nothing has occurred. We have, unfortunately, much experience with this with wildland firefighting. We'll ask people to leave. We save their structures, or the fire decides to burn a different direction. They come back, and there's nothing afflicting their home. And people aren't always happy about that. I wish we can get it right every time, but we can't. We don't know when it's going to come. So, again, leave if you're uncomfortable. Expect that we're going to ask you to leave. We may get it wrong. But your safety is our top priority, And if you have any doubts, get out. Okay, folks, that's all I got for you. Thanks for your attention. I hope that you got something out of this, and we hope that you're safe. And again, if you have any doubt, get out. Thank you.